What is going on, Ivy Nation? Welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, After Dark edition. We are putting out our very first college football playoff ranking reaction show, and we will do this every Tuesday for the next 6 weeks. That there is a show, and we will kind of give our thoughts on where things are, and obviously specific to Notre Dame, but then overall as well, and what that looks like and our thoughts on it and just the matchups that are going to change things going into next week and all that fun stuff. So this is a fun show to do. It's off the cuff, man. Like, we have our opinions about college football. Obviously, we have our opinions about Notre Dame, and it's fun to just kind of get on here and either commiserate or celebrate or whatever with everybody in IB Nation. And so glad you guys are hanging out with us on a Tuesday night, and you can kind of earmark this time and place every Tuesday night, unless the mothership decides to do it at a different time or whatever. But we'll always
we'll try to stay close to like at 8, at 7, at 8, even if it's a little bit longer afterwards. And then we'll do the live show at CFB Nation, which we did earlier, which will have more of a national feel, and talk a little bit about Notre Dame tonight because I thought it was relevant. But it's going to be fun. I mean, there was a lot in there that I liked about the rankings. There was some hypocrisy in the rankings. There were some double standards in the rankings. There were some things that made sense, some things I liked, some things I didn't like. There were some good things for Notre Dame, some bad things for Notre Dame, Vince.
Yep.
So I'm very much looking forward to having this conversation. And focusing, we'll focus mostly on Notre Dame, but we will talk overall. We'll both share our opinions of just the overall of what the rankings mean, what our opinions were of it, what we liked, what we didn't like, just from a big picture standpoint as well. So I'm ready to roll.
100%. But before we do, we're going to talk about our friends over at MyBookie and everything that they've got going on. If you don't have a betting site or you need a new betting site, MyBookie is the place to be. You can use our promo code IRISH, and it will double your initial bankroll right off the bat. 100% deposit bonus. Boom, boom, boom. You're in it. You're having some fun. You're winning some money. And then once you get into it, you can use MyBookie Plus, and that's a new loyalty rewards program. And they're just going to reward you for hanging out with them, which I think is pretty stinking cool as well. So mybookie.com is where you want to be. Promo code IRISH will double up your initial deposit. That's happening for me here very, very soon. I'm going to take advantage of that because I can. And I'm going to use promo code IRISH to double up what I first put in there. So if you don't have a site or you want multiple sites, because I know some people that use multiple sites, jump on MyBookie, use promo code IRISH, and it'll be a good launching point for you. So bet anything, anytime, from anywhere with MyBookie, the sports book that gives you control and rewards you for every moment of play. All right, Brian, let's jump into this thing. Notre Dame obviously comes in at 10. Here, let me rattle off the top 12 because that's the most important at the present. And we will obviously talk about the entire top 25. But the top 12 at the moment, and the reason I'm only going to 12 is because the highest ranked group of 5 is in the top 12. So we don't have a situation, at least this time around, where it is a lower ranked conference champion that's going to jump up and bump somebody out. So that's something to keep in mind at this point. But so the top 12 are Oregon at 1, Ohio State at 2, Georgia at 3, Miami, Florida at 4, Texas at 5, Penn State at 6, Tennessee at 7, IU at 8, BYU at 9, Notre Dame checks in at 10, Alabama 11, and Boise State, the aforementioned group of 5, highest ranked team at the moment, is at 12. So Brian, your initial thoughts on the top 12 and kind of where things are, and we'll just kind of leaping point for there.
Can I just kick it off and say it is the most college football, ESPN, NCAA, all these entities, and I know NCAA doesn't have anything to do with this particularly, but that the AD of a school who just got blasted for freaking cheating is at the head of the committee. They talk about just having no awareness whatsoever of the optics of this. You had to fire one coach for your basketball coach you had to fire because he just was a nut off the court. And then your football coach basically gets a what is it? I forget what it's called, but basically a stay, right? Basically, or not a stay, but I'm just drawing a blank. Somebody in the chat will remind me of what it is. But basically, he can't. If he comes back to college football, he's got to deal with some sanctions are going to
why he
follow
left.
him.
That's why he left.
And and let's go ahead and put their AD, who's so ahead of and on top of his programs that he's dealing with this, in charge of the playoff committee. Super good idea there, guys.
It was a weak interview too, by the way.
But overall, anyway, let's just talk about like for the Notre Dame aspect of it. We said Trev and I did a show last night, Vince, and we did the Monday Sports Talk, IB Nation Sports Talk. Since all you guys were busy with stuff, we went and knocked that out of the park for you. Or I'd say we knocked it out for you. I don't know if we knocked it out of the park. I haven't looked at the numbers today. I've had some things going on, we said anywhere from 8 to 10 is where I said I expected Notre Dame to be.
Sure.
And we would kind of find out a little bit about, how they viewed Notre Dame's loss to Northern Illinois relative to their wins. And so 10, it's obviously at the bottom of what I projected. I think they should be higher based on who else is in the top 10.
Sure.
But, it's about where we expect Notre Dame to be. And if you're Marcus Freeman, you're almost kind of like, okay, this is a great place for us to be. The season ended today, we're in. Sure. If we win, we're in. The fact that you nailed it, Vince, I'm glad you said that. The fact that Boise is in the top 12, if they win out, you don't have to worry about somebody coming outside and bumping you off.
As a bid stealer.
Which could do that. That could potentially happen to two teams. So, like right now, the Big 12 and the Power 5, Group of 5 team both being in the top 12 is huge for Notre Dame. Because if Notre Dame was 10th, let's just say, and the ACC champ, Big 12 champ, and Group of 5 champ were all behind them, then they'd get knocked out at 10. Yeah, it's unlikely with how things are now, but it's possible.
Yeah.
So I thought being 10 was good for Notre Dame from Marcus Freeman because he can spin. You can spin. I hope he doesn't just say, "Hey guys, we're not worried about that right now." It's just good. I want him to use, because I've said this team plays better when they're pissed off, especially when you're playing a 1-8 team this weekend, and then maybe a 4-5 team the next weekend, and then Army. This gives you something to be like, hey, you see the disrespect they have for us? They're still holding this loss to Northern Illinois against us, so we got to go prove something this weekend. I think that part of it's great if you're Marcus Freeman, right? Because a lot of this, Vince, we're going to see some moving around over the next several weeks because as teams play each other. But just for a starting point, it's a decent starting point for Notre Dame. It has them in the playoff now. They'd be on the road now. But it also, I think it's good. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think if Marcus Freeman uses this correctly, he can kind of, hey, look, we're 8th in the AP poll, but these cats only think we're 10th. You know what I mean? Let's go show them this weekend who we are, and just more of a need for style points.
I think it's a good launching point for Notre Dame. You're, like you said, you're in right now, and you basically hold your destiny in your own hands. That's the way I look at it, and that's where you want to be as a coach. No matter what level you coach at, you want your destiny in your hands. You don't want to have to be scoreboard watching. You don't want to have to be counting on somebody else to carry your water for you so that you can do what you need to do. Now, is there going to be some scoreboard watching of teams that are ahead of them? Sure. But if they take care of their own business, regardless of what happens ahead of them, then they're in. And I think that's the most important piece of this right now. And that would be my message if I'm Marcus Freeman to the team. It's like, look, you can think you're disrespected at 10, and that's fine. Use that fuel. That's great. But if we take care of our business within the walls of the Goog, if we take care of us, we're in. And I think that's exactly what you want to say. I don't want to have it any other way as a coach. I don't have it any other way. I want to be in charge of my destiny. And now, do I think some things above Notre Dame are going to work themselves out so Notre Dame has a chance to climb? I do. But that's a different conversation. What I'm saying to my team, if I'm the head coach, is that we control this thing. If we go 4-0 to finish off this season, we're in, baby. And if we're on the road, awesome. Let's go. I think that's exactly where you want to be if you're Notre Dame. And so I think they're in a great spot right now. Look, 10's low. I agree with that wholeheartedly, and we can talk about that, and we will, but they control their own destiny, and I love it.
I don't know that I would say low, but they are at the bottom of what they should be projected.
That's fair.
I'm saying I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just giving you my opinion on it.
Yeah.
But it is still a good place to kind of build. I'm sorry, I just laugh. You say that's the fuel because every time somebody says that, I'm just like Techland fuel. Techland fuel. Right? I mean, that's exactly what it is, man.
Gatorade.
But can we jump to the rest of the top 25 for
100%?
Because this is actually where it got really. So somebody in the chat said there's no other wins in there for Notre Dame to move up, and I'm like, actually, I disagree with that. There's a couple things in the rankings that are good for Notre Dame because what the committee has said, and for the most part, they have held to. And there's been times teams keep winning and they flip teams because your overall strength of schedule gets better. We've seen it in the past. But when you look at Notre Dame right now, you do have the benefit that they have is the fact that Army got ranked at 25.
Absolutely agree.
If you are a Notre Dame fan, you are so praying for Army to beat North Texas this weekend at North Texas. North Texas actually is going to be the best team Army's played all year.
Yep. I think they got 2 losses or something like that.
I think they're 5-4 now. They were 5-2 at one point in time, or 4-2 at one point in time. I think they're 5-4 now, but they've had some quality losses recently. They just lost to Tulane by 8 this past weekend. They lost to Memphis by 8 the week before that.
They're 5-3.
I'm sorry, 5-3. Their only other losses to Texas Tech, who just beat Iowa State on the road. So they're 5-3. They play Army this weekend. That would be a quality win for Army if they can win that game. And then they're off before they play Notre Dame, Vince. They have a bye.
Yeah.
They play Notre Dame. So there's a good chance if Army beats North Texas this weekend that they stay in the top 25, which gives Notre Dame a chance for a third top 25 win. And if there's enough chaos, they could maybe stay in the top 25 if they're able to kind of win after they play Notre Dame, because there's a chance that if they beat North Texas, their last conference game, Vince, before the conference championship game, it would be against UTSA, who's 4-5, and it would be at home. So there's a chance Army goes on to win the AAC championship. That would, if they do lose Notre Dame, could potentially get them back in the top 25. And then the other one was Louisville being at 22. Now, we knew A&M would be in there. We'll get to in a second. But Louisville being in at 22 was huge for Notre Dame because it shows that the committee respects Louisville. I believe, Vince, that is the highest-ranked 3-loss team. It's the only 3-loss team in the playoff is Louisville at 22.
In the rankings, in the top 25.
Yes, exactly. And so they were ahead of, obviously, Army, right behind Washington State. But again, there's a lot of these teams ahead of them play each other. Iowa State and Kansas State got to play each other here at some point in time. So, and then Louisville gets to play Pitt, who's 18. They get them, I believe Louisville gets Pitt here in a couple weeks. Yeah, they play Pitt on November 23rd. So it's in 3 weeks, right? So they play them on the 23rd at home. So they're off this weekend. So they're not going to get knocked out this weekend, right? And then they play at Stanford, who is pretty awful as long as they don't just choke the game away. They're 7-3 with hosting a top 25 Pitt team. Now, will Pitt still be top 25? I don't know. They play Virginia this weekend, and then they play Clemson on the 16th at home. But one of those teams may fall below Pitt and Louisville. So Louisville's got a chance, and then they finish at Kentucky, who's handled them recently. But if they can run the table, and it's possible, now all of a sudden they're a top 20 team. And then Texas A&M being at 14, Vince, was also big for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I thought one of the things I just thought was absolutely stupid was the AP and the coaches polls both having A&M behind LSU, which is it's just the recency bias we talked about.
Exactly.
It's so lame. A&M 7-2, LSU 6-2. A&M just beat them a week ago by 15, and just because they lost more recently, you're going to knock them out, right?
Right.
And it's just silly. But the committee had them one spot ahead. Now, I'm okay with them being close in the ranking. It's just A&M should be ahead right now. So A&M comes out, Vince, and they have a bad loss, but they still stay in the top 15, which I think is big for Notre Dame because now you still have a road win over the number 14 team in the country. They have A&M this weekend is off. Then they have New Mexico State at home, and then they play at Auburn. So there's a good chance that A&M wins out between now and the Texas game, which then gets them close to the top 10, which is good for Notre Dame. And then if A&M can somehow beat Texas, that's huge for Notre Dame because then that would drop Texas. So I'm a huge Louisville fan for the rest of the year. I'm a huge Texas A&M fan for the rest of the year. And I'm a big Army fan the rest of the year because you're going to need them to continue to win and make your wins over them look better. That's the only way you're going to be on top of dominating the next 4 games.
Right.
That's the only way you're going to convince the committee enough to jump up as far as you should. But they're not far away from being a home team.
Right.
And that's a part that's going to take care of itself, because if they're
Correct.
10 now, they only got to get to 8.
Correct.
To be, especially since what you talked about, none of the teams like BYU's ahead of them. So there's 4 potential conference champions ahead of them right now. So BYU's ahead of them, Miami's ahead of them, Georgia's ahead of them, or Texas, whoever,
and then Oregon or
Ohio State. Right. So meaning none of those are going to leap ahead of them to get a 1 to 4 seed, which then would drop them down. And then maybe if they're ranked number 8 and the number 10 team is the 4th ranked highest conference champ, then that would bump Notre Dame down to 9.
Right.
Whereas right now, those teams are all ahead of them. So, and then of course, Georgia plays Tennessee here in a couple weeks, which means one of them will lose a second game.
Right.
That's a decent chance of another team falling down. Indiana and Ohio State play each other. So either Indiana falls behind Notre Dame or Ohio State does. So the bumping up is going to take care of itself from a teams. Georgia and Texas, if they both win out, will have to play each other again in the SEC title game. That may bump Notre Dame up a little bit as well if one of them gets blown out, for example, in a rematch. But anyway, Notre Dame is in a good position, Vince, to not only be in the playoff, but host a game if they win out and look good doing so. And that's where it's a good play. Because I was worried they might actually be like 11, 12, 13 if they really held that Northern Illinois. Like, it's clear they held that Northern Illinois loss against them, which, okay, that's a bad loss. But they didn't hold them against them as much as they maybe could have if they really wanted to ding Notre Dame for that loss. It was very clear that Army being at 25 and Notre Dame being at 10 says that, hey, Notre Dame, we're going to give you a chance to go prove yourselves over this last month of the season.
Right.
That's what it says to me.
In this scenario that J.S. Warner brings up, I just wanted to bring it up because there is some fascinating scenarios out there where there could be bid stealers and all that kind of stuff. He says there could be a bid stealer if BYU loses in the conference championship to someone like Colorado. Here's the thing. Yes, there could be, but I don't think it would affect Notre Dame. And here's why I will say that, okay? Because BYU, if they lose, they drop out of the top 12, right?
Yes.
Colorado is
they at least fall behind Notre Dame.
Fair.
At the very least.
That's fine. Yep. I think they would fall out, but that's neither here nor there. So at the very least, they fall behind Notre Dame. I'm looking at this from a Notre Dame standpoint, right? So BYU falls behind, then Colorado wins that conference championship. Okay, well, they're not in the top 12, so obviously they get an automatic berth as one of the conference champions. I think that they would be on the outside looking in of the teams that get a bye, though, because if Boise State keeps winning, they will be ranked higher than the Big 12 champion in Colorado. So Colorado will be slotted in that 12 hole.
Right.
And Notre Dame would be above that. So that doesn't affect Notre Dame in a negative way. It would affect somebody.
It would only leap Boise ahead of Notre Dame is all it would do right now.
Yeah, that's fair.
So like if
Boise would be a top 4
seed and like, let's say Notre Dame finishes the 8 seed, Boise's the 10 seed, they would then jump up and Notre Dame would slide to a 9. So it could affect them in that regard.
That's fair. That's fair.
But I think right now Notre Dame's ceiling is a 6 seed. If they run the table, I think their floor right now is an 8 seed. And I think they could. So I'm going to have my playoff projection come out tomorrow because I did it Monday last week because we weren't going to have this.
Right.
But I wanted to see what the playoff committee rankings were before I then release my projections, not go off the AP.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I'll have that out tomorrow. I still have Notre Dame at 7 as of right now, but a lot of things could shake that up.
Sure.
If Ole Miss beats Georgia, people are like, well, they're both going to get in. They probably would both get in if they both run the table, but in my opinion, they're both going to be behind Notre Dame. And the only way Georgia gets in if Georgia loses to Ole Miss, the only way they both get in is if Georgia then beats Tennessee the next weekend, which drops Tennessee below Notre Dame. So that's what we talk about, Vince, of all the chaos. Notre Dame's in a good position now to host a playoff game. And you make a great point because BYU or Boise State is where they are. And now winning out for Boise State won't be super easy, but they're going to be favored to run the table so far. Right now, they play San Jose State, Wyoming. They play Nevada this weekend, then San Jose State, then Wyoming, and then Oregon State. You know, Nevada's not a very good football team this year, although they did play SMU really tough early in the season, but they're 3-7. San Jose State's 5-3, but they can score a little bit, but they have lost 2 of their last 3, so they're struggling a little bit. Wyoming's 2-7, but they did just upset they lost to San Jose State recently. They beat New Mexico this past weekend. They're 2-7, and then Oregon State's 4-4, and they just got blown up by Cal and lost to UNLV, lost to Nevada. They're not very good. And their wins are over Idaho State, San Diego State, who stinks, Purdue, who's not very good, and Colorado State, who's actually decent this year. So if they run the table based on the standings as we see them right now, most likely what would happen, Vince, is they would get a rematch, I believe, over UNLV in the Mountain West Conference game. So here's the other thing. Colorado State is an interesting position because they play Wyoming, at Fresno, and Utah State. And so, as I just mentioned, Wyoming's not very good, right? And so that would be interesting. Utah State's only 2-6, and Fresno's the one that's interesting. Fresno's 5-4, and they're 3-2 in conference play. If Fresno beats Colorado State, that puts UNLV in a good position for a rematch. And I don't like rematches, although I think Boise could win that when they beat UNLV at UNLV, but rematches are tough. So if you really want to get in, if you super want to nerd out right now on who to root for, go Broncos and go Rams. You want Colorado State to run the table because you want Boise playing Colorado State in that last playoff game, Vince, because they will not have played Colorado State. It won't be a rematch. Because of the size of the Mountain West, they're like a lot of these other conferences. They're at 14 now, I think 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're at 12 now, so they don't all play each other. So Boise State doesn't play Colorado State. Colorado State doesn't play UNLV. Right? That's how it's all shaken out. So if Colorado State, who's already played 9 games, if they win their next 3 games, then they get into the Big 12 title game instead of Boise, and that increases the odds that Boise gets that bid. Because what could happen, the worst case scenario for Notre Dame is, as far as getting a home game, not making the playoff, but getting a home game is a Big 12 team beats BYU and Boise gets knocked off by somebody else in the Mountain West.
Right. Upsets in the conference championships are going to be Notre Dame's bugaboo.
But only in those 2.
Right. But I'm just saying, not even just this year, but in the future and, other, if Notre Dame's not undefeated, okay, upsets in the conference championships, that hurts Notre Dame. I mean, it just does. And so they're going to have to be very careful about that sort of thing. Not that Notre Dame has any control over that, but that could hurt Notre Dame until they change the way this thing works, right? Upsets, major, and I'm talking major upsets, upsets where a team that's ranked out of the playoff upsets somebody that's in the playoff. That kind of thing would hurt Notre Dame, not just this year, but in the future as well. So you kind of have to hope that teams hold serve in these conference championships an awful lot, to be honest with you, if you're a Notre Dame fan.
But being at 10 pretty much ensures that Notre Dame is still in. Let's say the regular season was over, right now, only one of those things could happen. Well, 2 of those things could happen because you could have SMU beat Miami and drop them down. And then you could have, Boise State, even if Boise State wins, right now they might get the 4 seed, but if Boise State then loses, that would then drop Notre Dame down a spot. But both of them don't drop Notre Dame down. Only one of them would drop Notre Dame down. So being at 10 right now, they're in a good position unless a third conference champion upset happens, which could be something like SMU beating Miami.
Yeah.
However, again, it would, I think then Miami would fall behind Notre Dame.
Sure.
Is what I think would happen at that point in time. But that's the only thing where it could really continue to maybe knock them down is if something like that happens. But that is almost impossible to happen right now because someone would have to leap them between now and then because of all the games that are being – there's a lot of games being played between teams ahead of Notre Dame.
Correct.
Georgia has to play 2 – if Georgia runs the table in the regular season, they have to play Texas.
Correct.
Unless Texas loses, and then it doesn't matter. Texas is out behind Notre Dame anyway.
Right.
But if they both run a table, then they have to play each other. If they both run the table, then that means Tennessee gets knocked down. Ohio State and Oregon, if they both run the table, it knocks Indiana out or behind Notre Dame. Yeah. And then one of them would lose. And if Oregon beats Ohio State in a rematch, I think Ohio State's probably still in,
but they'd be
below Notre Dame.
Well. Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of scenarios, but Notre Dame is in a good place to be in. The question now is, where will they be hosting, or will they be going on the road? That's really the question at this point in time.
Nope, completely agree with that. And like I said, I think there to a degree, I think things are going to work themselves out to a degree. But there's going to be some scoreboard watching for Notre Dame fans. And we'll give you the, who to root for and all that. I love that article when it comes out, by the way, Brian, like who to root for.
I'll get it out a little bit earlier this week.
I know you will.
Saturday this past week, but
I know you will. No, it's good stuff. And, but, again, at 10, Notre Dame controls their destiny, which
for the most part.
For the most, unless look, is there a scenario that we could draw up in our brains that would bump Notre Dame out because of, upsets and things? Yes.
It'd be like a worse. Yes. I mean, like everything went wrong.
Correct. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Everything went wrong. Right.
Correct. And is it possible? Sure. Nothing is
It's highly unlikely.
But highly unlikely. So Notre Dame controls their own destiny. And I think that's a good place to be. And look, we heard about it a few weeks ago on the telecast. Style points are going to matter to a degree, because as you mentioned earlier, Brian, there are going to be, like you said, if we are comparing Penn State and Notre Dame's resume, there's common opponents there. And so Notre Dame needs to look better against those opponents than Penn State does.
So let's just go there now.
Okay.
All right. So let's just kind of wrap this thing up with our overall thoughts of the rankings. And there was a question from M. Rudy. How was Notre Dame ranked above BYU? Thank you for the super chat, my man. How is Indiana ranked above BYU? BYU has 2 top 20 wins over SMU, over number 13 SMU. So there's 2 big beefs that I have in the rankings. And the first one is right here.
Yes,
BYU should be ahead of Indiana. I know that Indiana's blown out teams that aren't, BYU's had a couple, close games against like Oklahoma State. But the fact is BYU has a win over your number 13 and number 19 teams. They beat the number 13 team at their place in September, and then they beat K-State by 29. So I'm okay with actually both of them teams being ahead of Notre Dame.
Sure.
And I know that Indiana hasn't beaten anybody, but they've dominated everyone they've played, and they have played Northern Illinois type teams and beat them.
Mm-hmm.
So I got no beef with that as far as them both being ahead of Notre Dame. And look, if Indiana's legit, then they'll beat Ohio State, and we won't be having this conversation. We'll be talking about, hey, that's a really good football team.
Sure.
And, they got to play Michigan this weekend, and I think that they'll smack Michigan as well. I think Michigan's secondary is a hot mess. They play Purdue, and we'll see what the score is of that game. I mean, but they're handling business. They're doing what you're supposed to do when you're a good football team and you have a soft schedule. They're blowing people out. And their soft schedule isn't like, Cincinnati from a couple years ago when they were an AAC team, and the only good team they played all year was like not even Notre Dame, because I'm talking about in 2020. And people thought they should have been in the playoff over Notre Dame. And I'm like, yeah, they had a better record. They went undefeated, but they played no one all year. They're in the group of 5 this conference. This is still a Big Ten teams they're beating. They haven't played, Oregon or Ohio State or Penn State yet, but they're still playing Big Ten teams and smacking them. But BYU should be ahead of them, in my opinion. Just this flat out should. But at the end of the day, I don't think it matters, because if BYU was ahead of them and Indiana goes and beats Ohio State, then they would leap at BYU anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But if Indiana loses to Ohio State, then they'll fall behind BYU anyway. So that one doesn't matter a whole lot to me, but I agree with you. I think it's ridiculous that they weren't ahead of them. The big problem for me is Penn State at 6. And I went off on the show we did earlier. I do not understand the obsession that people have with Penn State in the committee. I don't get it. I challenged the guys I was on the show with tonight. Love those guys. But I'm like, give me a case for Penn State being at 6 besides just their Penn State. Well, they've got a better win than so. No, they don't have a better win than. First of all, Penn State's 6-1, BYU's 8-0. BYU's in a Power 4 conference, and they have 2 wins over teams that you as a committee rank in the top 20. Penn State has 0 wins over teams you have ranked in the top 20. Well, they have a better loss. BYU doesn't have a loss, right? I mean, they had played a team like Ohio State. So freaking what? Okay, cool. We'll give Penn State even being in the conversation is because they had a close loss to Ohio State. But who did they beat? What's the argument for them? Okay, they had a close. Okay, so let's put Nebraska in, because Nebraska was more competitive against Penn State against Ohio State than Penn State was at Ohio State. So if we're just going to say, okay, They had a really close loss to Penn State or Ohio State. All right, cool. Nebraska, you're in the top 25 because you almost beat Ohio State at their place. You know what I mean? Like, their best win is over Illinois, who's like 6-3 and just got smacked this weekend. You know what I mean? Like, and they didn't even look that good against Illinois, Vince. I mean, they beat them 21-7. Illinois just lost at home to Minnesota. A week before that, they got blown out by Oregon. They beat Purdue by a freaking point a week after losing to Penn State, right? So it's like there's no argument. Okay, well, Indiana hasn't beat anybody. Okay, that's a fair point. Penn State hasn't beaten anybody either. Okay, but they do have a common opponent, Vince. They do have a common opponent, right? The common opponent would be what? UCLA, right? They both played UCLA. Well, what was the score of those two games? Indiana went on the road and beat UCLA 42-13. Penn State beat UCLA 27-11, and it was a legitimately close game.
At home.
Penn State was never at home. So it's like, okay, so you're really going to tell me that and that's what's frustrating is like, he's like, well, you know, Wisconsin's a good win. And then he wanted to, because I said Ohio State has a sneaky good schedule. He's like, really? And I said, yeah, they beat Iowa. He said, well, Iowa's not that good. Iowa just beat Wisconsin by 32. And you just got done telling me that the Wisconsin win was a good win for Penn State, who beat them by 15. You know, like, there's just no good argument you can make for having Penn State at 6. None. Zero, zip, zilch, nada. None. And if we're going to say, well, it's because they're Penn State, cool, then put Alabama up to 6. I would literally have more respect for them if they'd have put Bama at 6 and Penn State at 11 than I will where they are right now. Because, yes, Bama's got two losses, but they beat Georgia, right? I mean, they've got at least some good wins. They've played a very challenging schedule so far this year. Alabama has. I mean, they have a much more competitive schedule than they have. I mean, they beat a 6-2 Western Kentucky team by 63-0. They beat Wisconsin 42-10. Penn State beat them 28-13. They both played at Wisconsin. They beat number 2 Georgia. They beat number 24 Missouri 34-0. And their only other loss is a touchdown loss to number 7 Tennessee and then Vanderbilt, right? I mean, so like, I literally would have had a more respect for them if they had Bama at 6 and Penn State at 11 than where it is now. It's the only really egregious ranking that they had. There's some teams I thought were a little too high, a little too low, but it wasn't terrible. I was fine with the overall. The one I have the biggest beef with is Penn State. Like, Tennessee's a little too high. They beat Bama. They beat Bama. Yeah, but they had an ugly one over Kentucky. They looked better beating Kentucky than Georgia did. They beat Kentucky by 10. Georgia beat Kentucky by a point. And Kentucky, Vince, you and I were on the phone, I think, when that game was being played. And they gave that game to Georgia, in my opinion. Yep. Kentucky should have won that football game. And the officiating of that game helped Georgia out a lot as well with that fumble call. So my thing is this. No one has yet to give me, other than they got a good loss, no one has made a case for why Penn State's at 6. I don't understand it. There's no case to be made. And if you're going to say, well, they have a good loss, okay. I mean, then fine. Have them as the highest of all the one-loss teams outside of Ohio State, Georgia. But you know, Texas has a better loss than that, wouldn't you say? I mean, Texas lost to number 3 Georgia, right? I mean, so it's slightly better loss than Texas, but Texas has better wins. You know, I mean, Texas beat Vanderbilt, who's better than anyone Penn State has beat. I mean, they beat Michigan on the road, a Big Ten team, 31-12, convincingly beat a Big Ten team on the road. Like, they've beat more teams with records above 500 than Penn State has. Penn State has 2, I think, wins. Oh, let me pull up my resume sheet. Penn State right now has 2 wins over teams. So Penn State's overall opponent winning record is, so like the record that their opponents have is 33-34. Notre Dame's is 35-33. So slightly similar, but Notre Dame's is better. Penn State's 0-1 against top 25 teams. Notre Dame is 2-0. Let's compare them to Texas. Texas's opponents have an overall winning record, or a record of 40-30. Significantly better than Penn State's. The teams that Texas has beaten have a combined record of 33-29. The record of teams that Penn State has beaten, Vince, is 26-33. Texas has played 5 teams with a record above 500. Or excuse me, Texas has beaten 5 teams with a record above 500. Penn State has beaten 2 teams with a record above 500. Notre Dame has beaten 4. So again, other than good loss, okay, cool. Give me a freaking break. You know what I mean? So how are they like? They're not even should be close to Texas. Compare them to Tennessee. All right, both of them are 7-1. Both of them lost to good football teams, right? Oh no, they didn't. So Penn State has the better loss than Tennessee. All right, Tennessee's beaten 3 teams with a record above 500, and they're 1-0 against top 25 teams. They beat number 11 Alabama. So again, you really value the good loss that much more than actually beating anyone worth a darn? Like, really? Is that what we're going to do? So I think that was the biggest, most egregious thing we've seen. And Penn State has a long history of beating no one any good. Notre Dame fans always go, well, Notre Dame needs to prove they can win some of these games. All right, cool. I respect that. What's the big win Penn State has? A Cotton Bowl victory over Memphis? Michigan when they're down? You know what I mean? Like, oh, but they beat Ohio State one year. Back in 2016, Notre Dame's had multiple top 5 wins since then. You know what I mean? Like, and they've gotten dominated in recent seasons by that. And that's what's so stupid about it. Well, they got a good loss. It's a joke. Okay, fine. Put them in the top 12. But having them 6 over an undefeated team with no losses and 2 top 25 wins? Like that, like I could even understand them being ahead of Notre Dame. Okay, it's stupid. They shouldn't be ahead of Notre Dame, but I wouldn't even be all that upset about it. I would have given a little mini rant. But how are they ahead of BYU, who's 0 losses and has beaten a top 15 team out of conference and beat a top 20 team in conference by 29? Not top 20 when they played, top 20 right now. They beat number 19 K-State right now by 29 points. How are they behind Penn State? Other than they have a Y on their helmet and Penn State has an ugly blob of crap white. That's the only difference. There's no excuse for Penn State being 6. None. That's my rant.
I also think part of the reason that Penn State is at 6 is, like I pulled up that comment earlier, I think it's also to prop up Ohio State at 2. I think that's part of it.
I think you could have dropped Penn State to 12 and still justified Ohio State at 2.
Okay.
In my opinion. I don't even think you needed to do that. Because you could say, hey, guys, we lost to number 1 by a point. And you could also look at Ohio State and say, look, we played let's say they dropped Penn State to 11. Or 13. Let's say they dropped them out 13, dropped them down 13. We beat the number 13 team in the country. We didn't even play good football and still beat the number 13 team in the country at their place. And we lost to the number 1 team by a point. Our overall record of our opponents is 43-26. The record of teams that we beat is 34-26. They've beaten 5 teams with a 500 or better record, and all the metrics are good for them. You don't need that case. They have a better resume than Georgia without overhyping Penn State. They do. And if they beat Indiana in a couple weeks, it only bolsters their resume.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, to me, I don't think you're wrong, Vince, but I just think it's also they just continue to overhype Penn State. Way overhype Penn State. But again, what has Penn State done in the last several years to earn that right? Who have they beaten to earn that reputation? Nobody.
I think they're in trouble this weekend, if I'm being honest with you.
Who do they play this weekend?
Washington. Look, Washington's not a great team.
Is it home or away?
It's home.
Oh, yeah.
So Washington
sucks on the road.
I know.
They're dangerous at home, though.
I think that there could be a bit of a hangover for Penn State after the Ohio State game.
I hope so. And then they got to go to Minnesota in 2 weeks.
If they can get past Washington, which they should. Okay, they should get past Washington. Okay,
yeah.
But if they do, I think that Minnesota game looms large. I do. Yeah. I think that Minnesota. I mean, just ask USC fans about what it's like to travel to Minnesota. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't think Penn State's out of the woods yet.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of that, I said this to you before we started, Brian. I said, I think the Notre Dame Penn State matchup, I think that could happen, but I think the seeds will be reversed. Mm-hmm. I think Notre Dame's hosting that game.
I could see that.
At the end of the day.
So what could allow that to happen? Okay, Vince, you kind of hinted at it earlier. Number 1, Notre Dame has a top 25 team that they have to play. Penn State doesn't.
Correct.
So the further Notre Dame would have to dominate their next 4 games. like nothing within 14 points as Penn State continues to do what they do, which is just kind of win, but win ugly.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
So even if Penn State wins out, here's the other thing that Notre Dame has 0 common opponents with Penn State as far as who they've both played so far. But there will eventually be 2 common opponents. Penn State has played USC, and here's the best part. They play them at the same location.
Yes.
Which
USC.
is huge.
Yep.
So they play USC at USC. Penn State beat them 33-30 in overtime.
By 3, yes.
Yes. In a game they trailed 20-6. So if Notre Dame goes out to USC and wins that game convincingly, 10, 14 points where they're just clearly the better team the whole game.
Check mark.
Right? That's one. And then the other one is Penn State plays at the end of the season at Purdue. And actually, hold on a second. They play at Purdue actually next weekend.
I was going to say it's not the end of the season.
16th. That's Maryland.
IU plays Purdue.
Yeah, so they play at Purdue next weekend. So next weekend, so not this upcoming weekend, but the weekend of the 16th, they play at Purdue.
Yep.
Notre Dame beat Purdue 66-7. And I hear as well, but Purdue, there's some Notre Dame fans. Well, Notre Dame's offensive stats are inflated by the Purdue game. Okay, cool. Purdue sucks. Nobody else has come anywhere close to what Notre Dame has done against Purdue.
Correct.
Right? I mean, Purdue's given up a lot of points this year, Vince. They're not a very good football team. But the next closest number of points that anyone's had against them is 52.
Yeah.
Right? It's still 2 touchdowns greater than what anybody else has done to that bad football team.
Right.
They gave them the worst loss. They've literally worst loss they've had in school history as far as point margin. So unless Penn State beats them by a somewhat, like if Penn
it doesn't
State
have to be the
them,
exact same.
If Penn State beats them 56-0, I'm like, well, we beat them by 3. No, you both handled business, right?
Right, because you took your foot off the gas, probably. Whatever the game flow.
It's a wash.
Correct.
But if Purdue beats them the way they've beaten most of the teams they've played this year, 34-10, something like that, you're like, look, Notre Dame is clearly more, and Notre Dame did that to them the week after the Northern Illinois game.
Yeah.
So that's the argument that I would make in that regard, Vince. Is that right there? So,
and it wouldn't take much for them to, because right now, Notre Dame's 10, Penn State 7 in the seeding, right? So it's a 10-7 matchup. It doesn't take that much to flip flop that.
Well, you'd need to look at them in the overall ranking because the seeding part won't matter as much with those two because they'll both be at larges. So basically, Notre Dame is, and here's to your pathway, Vince. So Penn State's at 6, Notre Dame's at 10. All right, if Ohio State beats Indiana at home, which we anticipate they will, although I don't think it's a lock because Ohio State does not look good in recent weeks. And I mean, they didn't look great against Penn State. They didn't look great against Nebraska. They didn't look great against Oregon. They have not lit the world on fire recently. But let's say they beat Indiana. Notre Dame will leap Indiana.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. So Penn State's at 6. Notre Dame is now at 9.
Because Indiana, just to clarify, at that point now Indiana has a loss, and now they're going to start looking at strength of schedule. Right now they're undefeated, and it's not as big of a deal.
Right.
It's still a deal, but it's not as big of a deal because they're undefeated. Yeah.
Right. They're not going to move them up because they have a good loss if they already don't respect their wins.
Bingo.
And then the next one is going to be Tennessee has to play Georgia in a couple weeks. So one of those two teams is falling behind Notre Dame. If Georgia loses a second game, I think they fall behind Notre Dame. I think they do. More than likely, Georgia's going to win that game because I believe it's at home.
Okay.
And Tennessee has not looked good for a month, and it's a home game. So I think Georgia handles Tennessee.
Yeah, I agree.
So, so that drops Tennessee below. So now Notre Dame's at 8 and Penn State's at 6. And so now it's Penn State, BYU, and Notre Dame.
Yep.
And so now you could get into a situation where if Penn State has some ugly wins, you could see them maybe flipping BYU and Penn State and then eventually flipping Notre Dame and Penn State.
Right.
So I could see that happening. I don't think it's as unlikely because right now people think it's a 5-spot difference. Yes, it's a 5-spot difference, but there's a lot of games to be played with those teams that are between them and above them. So, and then obviously for Notre Dame, the one thing you do have to be worried about, and another reason you have to dominate is because you have to be concerned, in my opinion, about Alabama right behind you. Because Alabama's going to have better losses than Notre Dame has unless Vanderbilt loses a couple games. But Alabama's also going to have a chance to go on the road and beat LSU this weekend, and I could see them overhyping that. Now, my counter would be, okay, you beat LSU on the road, who lost to Texas A&M. We, Notre Dame, if I'm making the case for Notre Dame, beat A&M on the road, who beat LSU. You know what I mean? So, like, the best wins kind of but then you could argue, well, yeah, but that's Bama's second best win. Their best wins over Georgia. Like, that's where I think they could make the case to put Bama over Notre Dame. I don't think I don't think it would happen if Notre Dame dominates the next 4 games. But if Notre Dame has a couple stumbles, I think you could see them leap Bama over Notre Dame. And that's the one that could get a little bit interesting as far as
my biggest thing at this point for Notre Dame, obviously, that all of this conversation goes without saying that Notre Dame needs to win out, and I think they need to win out somewhat impressively as well. Okay, but win out. I just want them to move up enough so that the potential conference championship upsets happen. It doesn't bump Notre Dame out. I don't like them in 10, 11, 12 spot, right? Because then that makes you vulnerable to a little bit of chaos. Like, that's the only thing for me. I need them to bump up a few more spots,
which they will. That's the whole point.
And I agree with
going to.
That's just my only fear. Let's say they stay at 10 for whatever reason. They stay at 10. Now I'm nervous at conference championship weekend because some different things can happen and Notre Dame can get bumped out. So they need to be up for a multitude of reasons.
Unlikely, but
agreed.
Yes.
Agreed. I don't want to have to travel for the first round. I want Notre Dame at home, right? I mean, I'd love to go on the road, have some fun, but Notre Dame deserves a home game.
It'd be awesome to watch them play a playoff game at home. It would.
Yes, it would. So, like, that right now, that is the number one goal, is that Notre Dame's hosting. I don't really care what if they're 5, 6, 7, or 8. That really doesn't bother me a whole lot.
Just be at home.
Yes, I want the ACC champ. Yes, I want the Big 12 champ, in the next round. Sure. If we're painting the perfect picture, but I want Notre Dame hosting. That's the biggest thing for me. And then you take care of the next round as the next round comes. Whoever that happens to be and wherever that happens to be. So for me, the biggest thing is I think Notre Dame, for the most part, has their destiny in their own hands for not only making it in, but also for hosting. Now, you can talk to Marcus Freeman. Maybe he'd love to go on the road, be the underdog. Sure, coaches want to play that up.
Well, and they do play better on the road than they have at home. I mean,
that's true.
If we're being honest about Notre Dame this year, one of the weird anomalies of Notre Dame this year is they have been really good away from home. I mean, neutral sites, and so they beat the number 14 team in the country on the road by 10. They went on the road to play Purdue and won by 59. They went on the road in a neutral site game against Georgia Tech and beat them by 18, and Georgia Tech scored last. And then they went on the road and played an undefeated ranked Navy team and beat them by 37.
Sure.
So, I mean, Notre Dame's been really good not at home. But I think that home game would be a little different.
Yeah, I don't see how you can't get up for a home.
Yeah, it's a playoff game. It'd be a little bit of a different deal. Yeah, no classes that week. I mean, it's just all football that whole 2 weeks before school's out. It would, because I believe finals are the week before the playoff. I believe
that sounds
so. Like
right.
The actual week of the playoff, I think they don't have finals. I believe I could be wrong. If there's any Notre Dame students in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. But I thought finals were like the week before the week of the game, because the game would be either played on a Friday or a Saturday is the first 2 round games wherever they place now, which I could see them like that Friday night game's probably going to be like the best matchup of all or the worst matchup of all. There's 2 ways to look at it. If you're the playoff committee, is that Friday night game, you want it to be the game that's not as appealing, because then you're if it's not a good audience, it's a Friday night audience. Right. Or it's still the only playoff game being played, so let's get the game that's not great out of the way. The other one is, let's run the scoreboard up a little bit on the ratings for this first weekend by putting that Notre Dame-Bama game at Notre Dame on Friday night.
Yeah.
That kind of thing I could see.
Right. Final exams are that week, actually.
They are that week? Okay.
Yeah. Classes are over on the 12th, but then they have like prep time and then they have exams.
And a lot of those kids will kind of be out of those. There's a lot of different things.
Oh yeah, 100%. I'm not overly worried about that part of it, to be honest with you. But yeah, look, this is not a bad spot to start if you're Notre Dame. I think that's the bottom line here. Yep. It's not a bad spot. There's some things that we can talk about, but it's not a bad spot. Yeah. And
good spot for the first one.
Yeah,
I thought they might have got dinged a little bit more.
Yeah,
for that loss.
Yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
With Louisville being in 22 and Army being at 25 and A&M being at 14,
because Army's like 18 or something in the AP, aren't they? They're
like 20.
They're significantly higher. I think they were in the high teens. So that the fact that they're 25 is big.
Let me see
And
here.
if they can,
I actually didn't think they were going to be in, Vince.
Really?
So in the AP poll, Army is 18th. You are correct.
Yeah.
And they are 19 in the coaches poll.
Okay.
I didn't think they're going to be ranked because their combined opponent win record right now is 17-41. I mean, the best team they've played this year is 4-4 East Carolina, who fired their coach, I think, a week after Army beat them.
Gotcha.
So I'm surprised they're in. And I think the fact that they're in tells me that the committee is setting up a chance for Notre Dame to jump up. We've said this before. The committee will put teams in the bottom that give teams they really like a chance to go up with those wins. So
Yeah. So, yay. Good spot for Notre Dame to start off with. It's going to be very interesting to see how things progress. Obviously, with games coming this weekend, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, you've got 4 SEC, you've got 4 Big Ten, you've got one ACC, 1 Big 12, 1 Mountain West, and 1 Independent. So it's 4-4, 1-1-1-1-1
in the top 12.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I was surprised by, Vince? There's there's one more ACC team in the top 25 than there are Big Ten teams.
Oh, interesting. Because ACC is heavy on the back end.
Exactly. You have Miami and SMU in the top 15.
Yep.
And then you have Clemson, Louisville, and Pitt in the top 25, where there's only 4 Big Tens. And the opposite's true. All the Big Tens are up near the top.
They're up towards the top. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But they're all in the top 10, actually. Which, again, should speak to your strength of schedule. You think the rest of that league sucks. You don't have any of those teams in the top 25.
Right.
I think there's as many Big 12 teams as there are. Yeah, because you've got BYU, you've got Iowa State, you've got K-State, you've got Colorado.
4.
You have 4 Big 12. You have the same number of Big 12 teams as you have Big 10 teams in the top 25. And you've got more ACC teams in the top 25. I mean, I think it says a lot.
Yeah.
About,
Yeah, so a couple things to keep an eye on, obviously. The conference representation in the top 12. 2 lost teams in the top 12, I think, is going to be a fascinating thing to keep an eye on. Right now, there's 1 in Alabama, but I think that's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. And so, and then obviously where Notre Dame lands. So,
and if they lose to LSU, I think LSU jumps into the top 12.
Oh, I agree completely.
Yeah. Shouldn't.
They want to overrate LSU so badly.
Yes, they do.
They so badly want to do that.
Yes, they do.
So we'll be keeping an eye on things Tuesday nights after every rankings. We'll have a live show, so we'll have some fun with that. But obviously,
most likely be around 8:00.
It just depends because look, when college basketball starts, sometimes it gets bumped.
It'll be like at halftime of a thing.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll, hit that notification bell, people. That way you know when a show is going to start. We do have a super chat here from Miles Whitaker. Thank you so much, Miles. This has been a lot of fun. Talking about possible scenarios is one of my favorite topics. It's one of ours too. That's why we do this show, to be perfectly honest with you. So make sure you guys hang with us. We've got obviously shows tomorrow in the afternoon and in the evening. So make sure you check those out. And then again, every Tuesday after the rankings come out, check those out. And then there's a game this weekend, Florida State, Notre Dame, IB Nation tailgate will also be on Saturday. So make sure you check that out if you're going to be in town. Details will be forthcoming. So make sure you check that out. And then, of course, we'll have the post-game show, then upon further review, and all of the fun that you can expect around here at Irish Breakdown. So make sure you hit that like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, all the fun stuff. Make sure you do it. So in the meantime, for Brian, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Have a great night.